You carried a knife to school every day. In your right front pocket, next to your lunch money and a piece of string you had no plan for. It was a folding knife with two blades, one large, one small, and a handle made of bone or wood or something brown that got smoother every month from the oil on your fingers. Your teacher knew you had it. Your principal knew you had it. The kid sitting next to you had one too. Nobody called the police. Nobody called your parents. Nobody called anyone. Because it was 1963 and carrying a pocket knife was not a crime. It was a childhood. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Someone gave it to you. You remember who? You remember the exact moment you were 7 or 8 or maybe 9, and it was your father or your grandfather or your uncle, and he did not hand it to you the way you hand a child a toy. He handed it to you the way you hand someone a responsibility. He looked at you. He might have said something, or he might have said nothing at all, just held it out and waited for you to take it, and when your fingers closed around it, something changed. You were not a little kid anymore. You were a boy who carried a knife, and that meant something. It meant that someone in your life believed you were old enough to own a piece of steel that could cut you and trusted you not to be stupid with it. You were not always smart with it. You cut yourself. Everyone cut themselves. The first time the blade closed on your thumb, that bright red line that appeared before the pain did, and the blood that came fast and then stopped, and the scar that you still have, that was not a tragedy. That was a lesson. A lesson that cost you a 1/4 inch of skin and taught you something that no classroom, no video, no safety seminar could ever teach: respect. The knife did not care about your feelings. The blade did not negotiate. If you held it wrong, it cut you. If you pushed too hard, it slipped. And after it cut you, you did not throw the knife away. You did not tell your mother. You wrapped your thumb in your shirt. You wiped the blade on your jeans, and you kept going, because that is what boys did. You whittled. Every boy whittled. You sat on the front porch steps or on a log behind the garage or on the curb in front of your house, and you took a stick and you shaved it into a point. Not because you needed a pointed stick. You did not need a pointed stick. You needed to sit there with a knife in your hand and make something happen with it. You needed to feel the blade bite into the wood and see the curl of shaving peel away and smell the fresh white wood underneath the bark. That was enough. That was the whole activity. Your father walked by and said nothing, or he said, "Don't cut yourself," which meant the same thing as nothing, because you had already cut yourself twice, and he knew that, and you knew that, and neither of you was going to discuss it further. You played mumbly-peg. Not every boy will admit this now, but every boy played it. You stood in a circle on the grass, the schoolyard, the backyard, the campground, and you threw your knife into the dirt. From your palm, from the back of your hand, from your elbow, from your shoulder, from the top of your head, each throw had to stick blade first into the ground. If it did not stick, you lost your turn. The loser had to pull a wooden peg out of the dirt with his teeth. It was ridiculous. It was dangerous. It was the greatest game you ever played, and your children have never heard of it because it does not exist anymore. The word itself, mumbly-peg, is extinct. Try saying it to someone under 40 and watch their face. They will not know what you are talking about. A game that every boy in America played is now so dead that the language forgot it. You used it for everything. You used it to cut fishing line at the pond. You used it to open boxes in the garage. You used it to scrape mud off your boots. You used it to pry the lid off a paint can when your father asked you to. You used it to slice an apple at lunch and eat it off the blade, which your mother would have stopped if she had seen it, but she did not see it because you were at school and no one was watching you eat an apple off a knife blade because that was normal. You used it to carve your initials into a tree, which you should not have done, but you did, and those initials are probably still there if the tree is still standing. You used it for everything because a knife was not a weapon. A knife was a tool, and a boy who carried a tool was a boy who was ready for whatever the afternoon brought. If you were a Boy Scout, you earned your Totin Chip. That was the official certification that said you knew how to handle a knife, an axe, and a saw. You had to demonstrate that you could open and close a blade safely. You had to show that you always cut away from your body. You had to prove that when you handed your knife to someone else, you closed it first and offered the handle. You had to earn the right to carry it. And when you got that card, that little piece of paper that said you were certified, you felt like you had been handed a license to be a man. Not a man in years, a man in responsibility. The knives had names, real names, names that meant something, names that you said the way other boys said the names of baseball players, because in your world, a knife was as important as a batting average. A Barlow was your first, a plain knife, 2 blades, a large clip point, and a smaller pen blade, a bolster at each end, a handle that could have been made from anything, bone, wood, brown plastic that pretended to be bone. It cost less than $1, and it was not fancy, and that was the point. Mark Twain gave Tom Sawyer a Barlow knife. Abraham Lincoln carried one. A Barlow was not a status symbol. A Barlow was a starting line. It was the knife you learned on before you graduated to something better. And every man who ever carried a fine knife started with a Barlow or something like it. A Camillus was the Boy Scout knife, the official one, with the BSA fleur-de-lis shield on the handle, nickel silver pressed into the brown jigged Delrin, and the blades that came from a factory in upstate New York that had been making knives since 1876. Camillus made knives for the Boy Scouts of America starting in 1947. They also made fighting knives for the Marines in 2 world wars, the M3, the KA bar, the pilot survival knife. The same factory that put a pocket knife in a scout's hand put a combat knife in a soldier's hand. And the man who built that factory, Adolf Castor, was a 14-year-old Jewish immigrant from Wattenheim, Germany, who arrived in New York in 1870 and started his career in a basement sorting cow chains for his uncle's hardware company. He worked his way up. He bought a small knife factory in Camillus, New York in 1902. He brought German cutlers across the Atlantic to work there, built a dormitory for them, and taught them American methods. By 1910, his workers were producing nearly 1 million knives a year. He made knives for World War I. He made knives for World War II. He received the Army-Navy Award in 1943 for his contribution to the war effort. He was, by every measure, one of the great immigrant success stories of American manufacturing. A Schrade was what your father carried, the old-timer series, the 340T Stockman with the 3 blades and the saw-cut Delrin handle that looked like bone but was not, or the 80T, the one with the clip blade and the pen blade and the handle that fit your palm like it was made for you, because your father's palm had shaped it for 20 years before he gave it to you. My dad gave me a Schrade 80T just like his when I was 10. That sentence could have been written by 10 million men. Schrade was founded in 1904 by a German immigrant family in Connecticut. They made knives in America for exactly 100 years. An old-timer was not a brand name to you. It was your father's knife. It was what he pulled out when he needed to cut a piece of baling twine or slice the tape off a box or peel an apple in one continuous spiral that fell to the ground like a ribbon. You watched him do that, And you tried to do it too, and the peel broke after 2 inches, and he said nothing, and you tried again the next time. A buck 110 was the knife you saved up for. The folding hunter with the brass bolsters and the ebony handle and the lockback mechanism that clicked open with authority. It came in a brown leather sheath that you wore on your belt on camping trips, and when you wore it, you felt like the most capable person in the woods. The Buck 110 was introduced in 1964, and it has been in continuous production ever since, which makes it one of the most successful knife designs in American history. But the world in which a boy wore a Buck 110 on his belt to school without anyone noticing, that world is as gone as the passenger pigeon. And then it ended. It did not end all at once. It ended the way a river dries up. Slowly at first, so slowly you did not notice, and then suddenly there was nothing left. Schools started banning knives in the late 1970s. First the big ones, the fixed blades, the locking folders, anything that looked like it belonged on a belt instead of in a pocket. Then all of them. By the 1990s, zero tolerance had arrived, and zero tolerance did not distinguish between a switchblade and a Boy Scout knife. It did not distinguish between intent and accident. It did not distinguish between a troubled teenager and a 10-year-old who forgot to take his grandfather's knife out of his backpack after a weekend at the cabin. Zero tolerance did not ask why the knife was there or who gave it to the boy or what he planned to do with it. Zero tolerance did not care that the knife had been in that family for 3 generations. Zero tolerance did not care that the boy had earned his Totin Chip and could handle a blade more safely than most adults. Zero tolerance saw a blade and saw a crime, and the punishment was the same whether the blade was 6 inches of steel or the butter knife in a packed lunch. There are stories that would make you sick. A boy in Virginia, an Eagle Scout, was suspended for having a 2-inch folding knife locked in his car in the school parking lot. He was not in the building. The knife was not in his pocket. It was in his glove compartment, in his own car, in a parking lot. He was suspended for 20 days. A boy in Texas was expelled for bringing a knife to school. It was the knife his dying grandfather had given him that weekend. The boy brought it because he did not want to leave it at home where his younger brother might find it. He was trying to be responsible. He was punished for it. A boy in the 2000s reached into his backpack and found his grandfather's old pocket knife. He had forgotten it was there. His grandfather had given it to him the previous weekend at a cabin after they had spent the afternoon whittling sticks by the fire. The boy did not bring it to school on purpose. He did not show it to anyone. He did not threaten anyone. It fell out of his bag during class. The teacher saw it, the principal was called, the police were called. The boy was suspended. He was 10 years old, and the knife his grandfather gave him, the knife that was supposed to mean trust, responsibility, and growing up, became evidence in a disciplinary file. That is what happened. That is what changed. Not the knife, the world. And while the world was deciding that a pocket knife was a weapon, the companies that made them were DIing. Schrade, the company that made your father's old-timer, went bankrupt in 2004. Imperial, who made the knives you bought at the hardware store for $2, went bankrupt the same year. Colonial closed, Utica closed, and Camillus, the company that had made Boy Scout knives for 60 years, the company that Adolph Castor built from cow chains in a basement, the company that armed 2 generations of Marines and 3 generations of Scouts, filed for bankruptcy on February 28, 2007. The factory in Camillus, New York went dark. The machines stopped. The workers went home. For 6 years, the building sat empty, and then on February 11, 2013, a welder preparing the building for demolition accidentally ignited the chemicals that had soaked into the floors and walls over 130 years of knife making. The fire burned for more than 30 hours. It took 2 million gallons of water to put it out. It was one of the worst fires in the history of Onondaga County. When it was over, the factory where your Boy Scout knife was made was gone, burned to the ground. 130 years of American craftsmanship erased in a day. The building that survived, the old headquarters, was turned into apartments. There is something you should know, though, about what was really lost. It was not the knife. You can buy a knife today. You can buy a better knife today than the one your grandfather gave you. Sharper steel, better locking mechanism, smoother action. The knives got better. What got worse was everything around them. What was lost was the trust. The idea that a boy could be handed a piece of sharpened steel and be expected to learn, through failure, through blood, through the slow mastery of his own hands, how to use it without being told every second what to do and what not to do. What was lost was the assumption that children could be competent, that they could handle real things, not plastic, not foam, not digital, but real, steel, unforgiving things that required respect and rewarded skill. What was lost was a world in which a boy sat on a porch and whittled a stick into nothing, and nobody asked what he was making, and nobody told him to stop, and nobody worried that the shavings were a mess, and nobody said that the knife was inappropriate, and nobody suggested that perhaps the boy should be doing something more structured, and nobody intervened at all because the boy was doing exactly what boys were supposed to do. He was learning to use his hands. He was learning to be patient. He was learning that if he pushed too hard, the wood split, and if he did not push hard enough, nothing happened. And that somewhere in between was the place where things worked. That is what a pocket knife taught, and no screen has ever taught it since. You still have it. You know exactly where it is. It is in a drawer, or in a box, or on your desk, or in your pocket right now. The blade is not as sharp as it was. The handle is darker than it used to be. There is a nick in the steel where you hit a knot in a piece of pine 40 years ago and did not know enough to stop, but you kept it. Through every move, through every decade, through every change in the world that made the thing in your hand less welcome and more suspicious. You kept it because your grandfather gave it to you, or your father gave it to you, or your scoutmaster gave it to you, and getting rid of it would be like getting rid of the afternoon he handed it to you and the look on his face when he did. The boy who carried that knife to school is still in there somewhere. He is older now, his hands are slower, his eyes are not as sharp. But if you put a stick in front of him and a knife in his hand, he would still know exactly what to do. He would open the blade. He would test the edge with his thumb. He would start at the far end and draw the blade toward him in long, smooth strokes, turning the stick as he went. The shavings would curl and fall, the white wood would appear under the bark, and for a few minutes, sitting there with a knife and a stick and nothing else, he would be 9 years old again, on the porch, with the afternoon ahead of him and nobody telling him to stop.